of Red Lake Falls. Would you tell us where the hollow is and what you remember about life there?
The hollow, as known as the hollow, was the original town site of Red Lake Falls. The first settlers that settled in the hollow were businessmen. The stores, Cowse's store, the Sally's Coal, Lambert's Dray, the mill. The original sawmill was at the bottom of the highway, which is now Highway 32. The hollow was known between what is now the bridge on 32, going up the hill to the north, to the bridge going down to the Klondike. The houses that were built here, the year after the mill was built, when my grandfather came here in '76, he followed Pierre Bottineau by about a half a year. Bottineau homesteaded out beyond the golf course, and Grandpa homesteaded up on the hill where the courthouse is now. The reason he homesteaded was he wanted the oak timber. Pierre homesteaded because he was going to farm. Grandpa was talked into coming here by Pierre Bottineau, who was probably 25 to 30 years older than my grandfather. But he knew grandfather was a prospector, that is, looking for water power was his, and to build mills for lumber. He wasn't a farmer. My other grandfather, Allard, came here in 1880, and he homesteaded east of town as a farmer. But he didn't farm very long. He moved into town and became a carpenter. Grandpa Buse moved in here in the in the winter of '76 and '77, and he found a log cabin vacated, which had probably been a trapper's cabin. We don't know the dates. The original trading post was established in Red Lake Falls at the confluence of the two rivers in 1798 by Jean-Baptiste Cardot. He operated from 1798 to about 1815, and then we have no record after that. When Grandpa moved into this log cabin, and during the winter, a young man came down from Canada by the name of Dr. Lemire. He was just a young fellow, and he had no place to live, so he moved in with Grandpa for the winter. This building, the following year, Grandpa built a sawmill down at where most of us knew the Steinert mill eventually was built there. But the first mill that he built was a little sawmill and a grist mill, just to grind wheat. The sawmill operated enough to make enough lumber for a few homes to be built. In the meantime, he moved out of the log house, built his first house up where the courthouse is now, first resident. The log cabin was used the next year as the first school in Red Lake Falls. I am not too sure. I think the history book has it, but I think Mrs. Zay, I believe, was the first teacher there that year. Many businesses that established at that time in the hollow expanded then up into what is now the main part or the main street of Red Lake Falls. Then the log drives started going through Red Lake Falls, and a big share of the businesses moved to the north side because of the log drives on the Red Lake River. There were log drives on the Clearwater River also. The last one took place in 1913. I never saw any of the log drives. The last one came through the year before I was born. I remember the hollow so well from the railroad, of course. The Great Northern was right alongside of my house. I was born in the little house right next to what is now the park, the Riverside Park. Grandfather owned all of this property, and my father was born right here where I live now in 1882. Their barn and where the cows roamed would be under the railroad grade now, and the park, which was, their land ran all the way to the river there. Then he sold his part of the mill to Cankel, who eventually sold to Steinert, and Cankel went to Fertile and established a mill there, and then later on in Terrebonne, and built the Terrebonne mill. My grandfather then went down to Minneapolis. He was in St. Anthony for a while, and he went to Fergus Falls and built a mill, and Pierre Botneau talked him into coming to Red Lake Falls because he said there's lots of water power here. That's what pushed him up to here. After he got it built and established, his next move was to Vancouver, British Columbia. He built 2 mills there. He was you almost call a floater. He never stuck with anything after it got built and running. He lost 2 pretty good fortunes in fires. One of them when he went back to Germany and got his second wife. And during that time, the mills burned down, and he lost everything in Vancouver. He went down and started in California. And he died in California. I never knew my grandfather Buse because he died the year before I was born. The town, after the lumber was removed, became a farming community. When I was young, the mills operated, the flour mill, I remember 4 large elevators operating. We as kids used to catch the farmers coming in with their teams in the wintertime and ride their sleighs. We could ride from the north side way to the south side and then catch farmers coming in with grain or hay, because everybody in town had a barn. When I was young, about every 3rd family had a cow. So we'd get our milk from the neighbors. All of them had horses. The Zeisers in the hollow, both Zeiser brothers, had at least a dozen teams, and they contracted for roads in the area. The businessmen, as I remember, 6 separate farm implement dealers in town. And people would come from all over the northern part of the state to buy farm implements because they had so many dealers here. There were things that were connected with the farm. Was the tow mill, which became the Fiber Products Company. They processed flax straw. The flax straw was used in furniture building. All old furniture, pert near, was stuffed with flax straw fiber. Probably 10 to 15% was horsehair, which was more expensive. In real expensive furniture, that was filled with horsehair. Cheaper furniture with flax straw. The flax straw manufacturer was in Minneapolis, and whose son eventually, Mel Davis, came up here and bought out the old flax manufacturing plant, which was down at Sportsman's Park. Just as you enter the gate of Sportsman's Park, there's a foundation there. There's a sign there now that tells about the mill, well, the flour mill. No, the flax mill. Also, there were 3 brickyards in town. One of them is at the base of the hill of the Hughes Elementary School. The other 2 were down just before you enter the Sportsman's Park. Those hills are all cut for clay. The reason they're chopped off like that, that's why they're sharp. They eventually slanted towards the river all the way. The processing of bricks ran for quite a few years, and then eventually they moved out. One of them went to Fertile, one went to East Grand Forks. I never saw the brickyards in operation. The sawmill was established down there in 1898. It sawed 1 board. The reason was their contract, and the man that built it had collected a lot of money under contract that he would saw lumber. He did. It wouldn't pay. It was a pretty good sized mill. But the problem was then, they were running logs down the Clearwater and down the Red Lake. And this was a real fine place for a sawmill, that they could trap the logs off of both rivers. But you want to remember that Grand Forks had a sawmill, then Fisher's Landing, then Crookston, then Red Lake Falls, then St. Hilaire, big sawmill, then Thief River. Well, when you start running logs down in the spring on river drives that are earmarked for any company, somebody is going to be siphoning off logs before they get to Grand Forks. It didn't work out too good. The only one that I can remember of hearing about operating pretty well was the big sawmill at St. Hilaire. When I was a kid, my mother used to walk down to the point with me. That was all brush, all trees and brush and dump. They found gravel down there and dug for years. Well, then when the gravel ran out, the city used it as a city dump then. When I was real young, everybody dumped wherever you could find a place to dump. Most of us dumped over the hillside. In the hollow, it started up by Baltons and Healy's, and they just dumped over the hill and all the way in the Steinerts and around this way. And eventually they stopped that. The city sort of established a dump in the abandoned gravel pits. And that worked good for a long time. By the time I was a teenager, we were shooting rats down there. We'd spent half the night down there shooting rats in the dump grounds. Then the state finally stopped that. They wouldn't allow dumping in a place like that. The city closed them. I asked the council one time if we could establish a archery range down there. That was about 1962. No, they said, sure, you can do anything you want with it down there. Well, that kind of opened the book a little bit, so that fall we established a rifle shoot down there. Pete Schmidt came down with his little bulldozer and opened up a channel for us, and we held a local rifle shoot, which were a lot more people than we anticipated. Near 100 shooters showed up. Then it gave us the idea that we'd like to establish a place for shooters. We used to shoot in the gravel pits. The state stopped that all through the state. They didn't, so we had to have a place that would be legal, and shooting in town was not legal, but the council said if we established a safe area, it was okay, and we did. Well, then that developed into a trap range, and rifle range, pistol range, silhouette range, and became quite popular. Now it's used. Every Tuesday we have trap shooting down there. We have shooters from Crookston, Miller, Erskine, Brooks, Thief River, that belong to teams that shoot here every Tuesday night. the park has developed into a pretty nice area for sports like that, but it is gradually developing into a pretty decent looking park, and we're getting lots of campers in there now. This Saturday evening I counted 37 tents in there, and most of those that come down from Canada during the long weekend of, which is our 4th of July, I guess theirs is the 3rd, and they use it just for camping and picnicking, and they do a lot of tubing on their own. I don't know if it's an overflow from Voyager's View, but after looking at Voyager's View, I could see that there has to be an overflow. It's so crowded. Most of the town developed into French background because Pierre Bottineau had brought up 12 or 15 families that settled between here and Terrebonne, lots of them between here and Gently. A German group came in. They established a church of their own, St. Mary's, and the north side became the German part of town. As a kid, the German and the French did not get along too well. The stores on the north side, Nemaskirns and Scholars, catered to the German families up around Wiley and the north part of town, and the southern ones catered to the southern and the French. And we had the French church and the German church in Catholics. We also had German Lutherans, and the Presbyterian church was right in the middle, right in the hollow. It was years before you felt free to go into another church. I was raised as Catholic by my mother. My father originally belonged to the Presbyterian church, but my mother went every once in a while to church with my dad, and she knew that according to her religion she wasn't supposed to go into another church. But as time went on, I married a girl that belonged to the German church on the north side. And I remember one of the first few times that I went to church with her, Father Pelger almost stopped the service to look down and see who I was. But that was typical of Father Pelger. But as time went on, intermarriage just completely changed all of that. Our friends and relatives continued to go to their churches, but the German and the French and in business ways, when the older people died off, those things completely changed because we started going to school with these kids. My lifetime has covered such an interesting change. I'm sure for years and years everything was the same, horses, and the automobile just came in. I would see as a kid a few automobiles, old, like 1910 Studebakers and Hupmobiles and Stutz Bearcats and Ford Model Ts. You'd see probably 1 or 2 cars to 10 horse-driven vehicles at that time. All of your freight was handled by either the railroad, the old steam engines, or the farmer with a team of horses that hauled his grain to town. That gradually changed up until World War I, 1917, 1918. And then you started to see more automobiles, and the horse and the cow barns in town started disappearing, which didn't make me any happier, because we used to play in everybody's barn. And then the railroad changed from the old steam engine with the whistle and the bell to the modern railroad. And we went through a period of time. We had both the NP and the Great Northern that came. The Great Northern came into town in the morning, went back in the afternoons. Both railroads operated. That was one of the big employees of the young men. Most of us didn't go beyond 8th grade, but those of us that could go to high school did. Those that couldn't all joined the section of the railroads. Then, as time went on, the railroads started to disappear. The trucks took their place. Highways became so much better. Our transportation is almost all highway transportation nowadays. Railroads that are still left are the big ones that go from coast to coast. There are very few. The railroads that used to go into Wiley and Dorothy and St. Hilaire, they're all gone. Everything is highway. The limit of transportation on trucks in my time now, I think, is all controlled by how good the highways are. The highways control the traffic. You could build a truck any size as long as the highway could handle it. Now, they're taking all of the bridges that I saw built down because they're too narrow for the farm implements. The farmer can't get through them. We got 2 of them going this year, right here, that'll be tore down and rebuilt. World War II changed not only my whole life, but almost everybody's, because of the way you lived. You went to school if you could, but after World War II, you had learned to travel. Most of us were born and raised and died in the community where we were born. After World War II, that didn't apply anymore. We started to travel. We lived for years in other parts of the United States and foreign countries, and in many, many cases, married girls or boys from other places. Whether you came back to your hometown and settled down, a big share of them stayed where they had married the girl that they met during the war. And from then on, travel was a big item. You weren't afraid of traveling. You spent winters in the south or the west or Florida, and you weren't a homebody anymore.